With this first image, I feel that my image is too flat. So that's a matter of contrast. One of the single most powerful tools that you have in Photoshop is curves. Curves is very similar to the curves dialog that you have in Camera Raw. It's also very similar to curves in Lightroom. So once you feel comfortable working with curves, you have a lot of power in your hands to alter the way your images look. Curves can be accessed through the adjustment layer icon. You scroll down and you go to curves. So what I first want to do is to demonstrate how you make your image lighter and darker in curves. So if you're in the center, all the way down to the bottom, and I'm going to open this up a little bit. All the way down to the bottom left is pure black. Diagonally and across the top is pure white. In the middle is your midtones. So if you're interested in making your image lighter or darker, you place an anchor point from the center and you either drag up to make your image lighter or you drag down to make your image darker. So in my case, I just want to make it a bit darker. And I will evaluate my image. If I feel that at this point I would like it to have more contrast, I would save this curves layer for exposure. You can double click on the layer in curves and you could write curves exposure. You don't have to write out the whole thing. I'm just doing it to show you. Curves exposure, so then you know that this curve layer is to make it lighter or darker. If you're interested in working with contrast in curves, you go back to the adjustment layer icon, you go to curves, and if you are under RGB, which is red, green, and blue channels together, and you enter an anchor point in the center, which is your midtones, and then where these two lines intersect, you add another anchor point, which will mean that you will be able to control your shadow detail area. And you add another anchor point on the top where you could control highlight detail area. I have the option of selecting any one of these points to work on them independently. In my case, I want to add more contrast. So I'm going to go up with my highlight and down with my shadows. And then the eyeball shows the contrast that I just made. If I wanted to reduce contrast, I would do an inverse S. So this is a very slight S curve, which means that I added contrast. If I wanted to reduce contrast, I would go up with my blacks and down with my whites. And this now is an inverse S, and I reduced the contrast. This is much more powerful than using sliders because you can manipulate your tones any way you want instead of using a slider. You can even manipulate them from your midpoints. So this right now looks a lot better to me in terms of contrast. Another very powerful method of correcting color is also with curves. So right now I have one curves layer that's for exposure. My second curves layer is for contrast. It's a good idea to keep these separate because then you could work on them independently from each other. The next thing that I will be doing in curves will be to control color. So I'm going to go back to curves. Now I have 3 curve layers that you can see here. This newest one that I just created, I'm going to label color. So then I'm sure that I'm in the right place. So when you have your adjustment layer icon selected, you can go to the top of this panel and give yourself more space. Now, under RGB, you're going to have other options. Right now, the 3 channels are selected. If you go to the drop-down menu, you have individual channels. So if I go to red, you're going to see this turn red. And if I wanted to get rid of a bit of red, I would go down on the red channel. And the opposite of red will appear, which is cyan. When you're in camera raw, the curves is very clearly indicated with colors, so you know what direction to go in. You have my handout that I will be uploading for class members to access that goes over what channel does what in colors. So I felt that my image was a bit too red. So I went to my red channel and I reduced red. I took out red by going down on the curve. If I wanted to add more blue, I would go into the blue channel, click from the center, and then go up to add a bit more blue. And one of the important things about color corrections is seeing the before and after to make sure that the color is exactly the way you want it. So this is after and this is before. And I like the corrections that I made here for curves.